This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my children could live in comfort. I thought when I grew old, they would respect me. But one night, during an argument, my son pushed me down the stairs. My body hit each step with pain, and when I looked up, he was standing above me laughing. My heart broke that night, but I was not powerless. I stood back up with a plan that would destroy his pride forever. You won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I was not born rich. Every dollar I ever earned came from sweat on my back and pain in my bones. As a young man, I worked in the fields at sunrise, carrying heavy loads until my shoulders burned. I worked nights at the factory, the sound of machines ringing in my ears even when I tried to sleep. I remember coming home with hands so cracked and rough that I could barely hold a spoon, but I kept going because I believed in one thing: building a life better than mine for my children. When my son was born, I thought my world had changed. I held him in my arms and promised I would never let him feel hunger the way I did. I worked double shifts just to buy him milk and clothes. When his shoes wore out, I skipped meals to buy him new ones. When he was sick, I carried him through the night to doctors, never caring about the money, only caring that he would live and grow strong. His laughter in those early years was my reward, and I told myself every day that my sacrifice was worth it. As the years passed, I built more than just income. I saved every dollar and bought land. Slowly, I built a house, brick by brick, nail by nail, every piece of it coming from my labor. That house became our home. My wife and I dreamed that it would protect our children even after we were gone. I wanted my son to never worry about shelter, never fear about tomorrow. I wanted him to inherit not just a roof, but also dignity, a safe place to raise his own family. When he grew older, I gave more. I paid for his education when he wanted to study. I remember walking miles to the bank just to withdraw money for his tuition. I carried the envelopes in my pocket like they were treasure, because to me, they were. That money represented years of sweat, but I gave it freely because I wanted him to succeed. I wanted him to walk into the world as a man with confidence, with opportunity, with doors open that had always been shut in my face. But it didn't end there. When he got into trouble as a young man, I was the one who bailed him out. Gambling debts, reckless mistakes, and even brushes with the law. Each time I stepped in. I sold land once just to pay off money he owed. I stood in courtrooms, my heart pounding, praying that the judge would be merciful. And when the fines came, it was me who handed over the money. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't watch my son destroy himself. I told myself he was young, and one day he would change. When he married, I was there again. I paid for the wedding, every flower, every meal, every decoration. I remember sitting at the back of the hall while everyone praised him for being a good provider, and no one mentioned me. But I didn't care. I thought that maybe this time he would be grateful. Maybe now that he was starting his own family, he would understand the weight of sacrifice. Maybe now he would see the father who gave him everything. Year after year, I kept building, saving, and giving. I built not just a house, but a future. I bought more land, put money in accounts, and kept everything ready for the day I would pass it on. In my mind, there was no question. My son would inherit it all. That was the dream I carried through every hardship. I thought to myself, one day, when I am old and weak, he will take care of me, and all my sacrifices will finally be repaid with love and respect. I never once thought about myself. I never took a holiday, never bought luxuries, never wasted money on things I didn't need. I lived simple. My clothes were plain, my meals small, my life quiet. All of it was for him, for his comfort, for his chance, for his tomorrow. I believed that a father's job was to carry the pain so the child could walk free, and I carried it all. Years of back-breaking labor, sleepless nights, and endless worry, just so he could smile without fear. But what I didn't know then was that my sacrifice was planting seeds in the wrong soil. Instead of growing into gratitude, it grew into arrogance. Instead of respect, it grew into entitlement. My son took everything I gave, but he never saw the cost. He never saw the nights I went to bed hungry. He never saw the scars on my hands, the ache in my knees, the weight in my chest. He saw only the comfort he lived in, and he believed it was his right. Still, in those years, I kept dreaming. I thought that when I was old, he would sit beside me and say, "Father, rest now. You did enough. Let me take care of you." That was the picture in my head when I worked until my body broke. That was the hope I held on to when my wife passed away and I sat alone in the house. I thought at least I had him. At least my son would be my comfort in the end. I was wrong. At first, the changes were small. I noticed them the way you notice winter creeping in, slowly, quietly, but cold enough to sting. My son stopped calling me father with warmth. His words became sharp, short, almost impatient. When I asked him to sit with me for dinner, he would sigh loudly, as if my request was a burden. When I tried to tell him stories of my youth, he would roll his eyes and look at his phone, as if I was speaking nonsense. These were small cuts, but they began to bleed into my heart. Soon the insults came. At first, they were hidden inside jokes. He would laugh with his wife and say things like, "Old man moves slower than a snail." I forced myself to laugh along, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I felt the sting. I told myself maybe it was just humor. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But the words never stopped. They grew sharper, louder, crueler. He started calling me dead weight. He said I was just an old body taking up space. His wife would smirk, covering her mouth to hide her laugh, but her eyes gave her away. She enjoyed seeing him mock me. I began to notice how he treated me around others. When relatives visited, he no longer showed respect. Instead, he would cut me off mid-sentence saying, "Don't listen to him, he's old and confused." The people around us would grow quiet, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. I would lower my head and pretend not to care, but inside I felt humiliated. I remembered when he was a boy, sitting on my lap, begging me to tell him stories about my youth. Now, those same stories were a source of shame. Even the smallest needs became reasons for cruelty. If I asked for help climbing the stairs, he would grunt and say, "You should have exercised when you were younger." If I asked for medicine, he would complain about the cost, even though it was my money paying for it. If I left a dish in the sink, he would shout, calling me lazy, forgetting that I had once cooked every meal for him with my own hands. Every request was twisted into proof that I was a burden. The house, once warm with family, grew colder. I was treated not as a father, but as a servant. He began ordering me to do small chores, things my body could barely handle. "Sweep the yard," he would say. "Carry these boxes." If I told him my back hurt, he would sneer, "Then stop eating my food." Those words cut deep. My food, my roof. Everything he enjoyed came from my hands, but in his mind, it was all his. I began to dread his voice. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway made me tense, waiting for the next insult. Even my meals became smaller. His wife began to serve me less food at dinner, sliding a small plate toward me while their plates overflowed. When I looked at her with quiet confusion, she would shrug and say, "You don't need much." "You're old," I ate in silence, each bite tasting like shame. The neighbors started to notice too. Once, when I greeted a neighbor outside, my son called from the doorway, "Don't waste your time with that old fool." The neighbor's smile faded, and I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I had spent my whole life building respect in this community, and now my own child was dragging my dignity into the dirt. But the worst part was not the insults. It was the laughter. Each time he mocked me, he laughed. Each time I stumbled, he laughed. Each time my hands shook and spilled something, he laughed. That laughter was louder than any insult. It told me he didn't just see me as weak. He enjoyed my weakness. I tried to ignore it. I tried to remind myself of the boy I once raised, the boy who used to hold my hand on walks, the boy who cried when I left for work and cheered when I came home. I told myself maybe he was stressed. Maybe things would change. I prayed for patience. I told myself to endure, because that is what fathers do. We endure. But deep inside, something was breaking. I felt the bond between us tearing, thread by thread. It was in these small moments that I saw the truth. My sacrifices had not grown into gratitude. They had grown into arrogance. My love had not planted respect in him. It had planted entitlement. He no longer saw me as a father. He saw me as an old man in his way. And while I still hoped he would change, a dark voice inside me whispered, "This cruelty will only grow worse." It happened on a night I will never forget. My body may grow old, but my mind will always carry that memory like a scar. The day had been tense from the start. My son had been pacing the house, angry about money, about bills, about life. He spoke sharply to his wife, slammed doors, and muttered under his breath. I stayed quiet, sitting in my chair, hoping the storm would pass. But storms do not pass when cruelty is the thunder inside your own home. That evening, as I climbed the stairs slowly to reach my room, my son stood at the top. His arms were crossed, his face twisted with disdain. "Move faster, old man," he snapped. I tried to smile, to calm him, and said softly, "My legs are not strong like before. Please, have patience." But those words lit a fire in him. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Always excuses. Always weakness. You're nothing but dead weight." His wife appeared behind him, peeking from the doorway, her lips curling into a cruel smile. I held onto the railing, my heart sinking. I wanted to pass quietly to avoid conflict, but my son moved toward me. His eyes held no love, no respect. They held only contempt. "You think this house is yours?" he spat. "You think you still matter?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before a word could leave, he placed his hands on my chest and pushed. It was not a playful push. It was hard, deliberate, filled with anger. My body lurched backward, and I felt my feet lose grip on the step. The railing slipped from my hand. Then gravity took me. Step by step, my body hit the staircase. My head snapped back, my arms flailed helplessly, and pain shot through my bones. Each wooden edge felt like a hammer striking me. My breath left me in sharp gasps, stolen by the fall. When I landed at the bottom, I lay twisted, aching, unable to move. My vision blurred. The ceiling spun above me. My chest heaved as I tried to take in air, every breath stabbing like a knife. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of me, lying there broken on the floor, discarded like trash. But then came the sound I will never forget. Laughter. From above the stairs, my son stood with his wife, looking down at me. He was laughing. Not nervous laughter, not regretful laughter. Cruel, mocking laughter. His wife covered her mouth, but her eyes shone with the same wicked delight. "Look at you," he shouted. "Old fool. You belong on the ground, not standing above me." His words cut deeper than the fall. I felt not only pain in my bones, but humiliation in my soul. I tried to push myself up, but my body trembled, my hands slipped on the floor, my knees screamed with agony. Still, I looked up at him, hoping for a flicker of shame, for a trace of the boy I once knew. But all I saw was a man who enjoyed watching me suffer. His laughter echoed in the walls of the house I built with my own hands. A house where I once dreamed of peace, now turned into my prison of shame. The silence that followed was worse. He did not come down to help me. He did not even move. He simply turned, walked away, and left me crumpled at the bottom like a broken piece of furniture. His wife lingered for a second, her smirk burning into me, before she too disappeared into their room. The door slammed shut. I was left alone, in the dark, with my pain. I dragged myself slowly to a chair, every movement heavy with suffering. My arms shook, my legs weak, but I forced myself upright. Tears blurred my vision, not only from pain, but from betrayal. I thought of the nights when I carried him up those same stairs as a child, half asleep in my arms, trusting me to keep him safe. I thought of the mornings I skipped breakfast so he could have more food in his plate. I thought of the sacrifices, the sweat, the endless hours of work, all for him. And this was my reward. The cruel act was not just the push down the stairs, it was the laughter afterward. It was the silence that followed. It was the message hidden in his actions, that I no longer had worth, that my suffering was entertainment, that my existence was something to mock. That night broke something inside me. The father in me, The one who hoped for change, who prayed for respect, died on those stairs. What rose in his place was something harder, colder, sharper. I realized then that love alone cannot heal cruelty. Some wounds cannot be closed with patience or forgiveness. My son's laughter taught me that. His cruelty opened my eyes, and though my body ached, my spirit began to harden. I would no longer hope for kindness. I would no longer wait for respect. I would no longer give my legacy to a man who saw me as nothing. That night, lying awake in pain, I knew what I had to do. I sat at the bottom of those stairs long after the laughter had faded. My body was weak, but my mind was awake, drowning in shame. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. The silence felt like chains pressing against me. I tried to stand, but every bone ached. My knees burned, my back screamed, and my hands shook as they pressed against the floor. Each movement was slow, heavy, humiliating. When I finally managed to sit upright in the chair nearby, I did not feel like a man anymore. I felt like a shadow of myself. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall where he could see. Instead, I wiped them quickly, though no one was watching. My chest rose and fell with painful breaths, my ribs sore from the fall. Yet the worst pain was not in my body. It was in my heart. It was in the memory of what had just happened. A son pushing his father down the stairs is not just an accident. It is not just anger. It is hatred dressed as laughter. It is cruelty made flesh. And I had lived long enough to know the truth. Cruelty does not soften with time. It only grows sharper. As I sat there, I remembered the nights when he was small, and he would cry out in fear of the dark. I would rush to his side, scoop him into my arms, and carry him gently up those very stairs. I would whisper, "Don't be afraid, son. Father is here." He would cling to me tightly, his little arms wrapped around my neck, his tears soaking into my shirt. I never let him fall. Not once. I carried him with all the strength in my body, even when I was tired from long days of work. And now, years later, that same boy stood at the top of the stairs, not afraid of the dark, but feeding on mine. The humiliation was not just in the fall. It was in knowing that the child I raised with love now saw my weakness as his power. It was in knowing that my sacrifices were invisible to him, erased by arrogance. It was in the way he laughed, a sound that turned every memory of fatherhood into ash. That laugh replayed in my mind like an echo. I heard it again and again, sharper than any wound, crueler than any insult. Even when I closed my eyes, I could still see his face, standing tall at the top of the stairs, looking down on me as if I was nothing. His wife beside him, smirking, sharing in my shame. That picture burned itself into my soul. They did not see a father. They did not see the man who built their home, paid their bills, carried their future. They saw something to mock, something to humiliate, something to step on. I lowered my head, staring at my bruised hands. My skin was scraped from the fall, my knuckles bleeding slightly. The sight made me sick, not because of the pain, but because it reminded me of weakness. I had never wanted to look weak in front of my son. When he was a boy, I was always strong for him, even when I was tired. I never let him see me bend under the weight of work, of hunger, of life. But now, in my old age, I could not hide it anymore. He saw my weakness, and instead of offering me his strength, he used it to hurt me. The humiliation spread deeper when I thought of the neighbors, the relatives, the people who once respected me. If they knew what happened tonight, what would they think? That I was a failure as a father? That I was too weak to command respect? Shame cut into me sharper than any blade. I wanted to hide from the world, to vanish, to disappear. But even in that darkness, another thought began to grow. Humiliation can do two things. It can break you, or it can harden you. For years, I had chosen to endure, to hope, to wait. I had swallowed insult after insult, telling myself it was just stress, just time, just youth. But this act, this push, this laughter, this humiliation was too much. It was no longer about patience. It was about dignity. It was about survival. I realized then that my silence had become my prison. My patience had become his weapon. My kindness had become his excuse to treat me as less than human. As I sat there in the dark, bruised and aching, I whispered to myself, "No more." The humiliation that night did not just wound me. It woke me. It tore the blindfold from my eyes. Still, I said nothing to him the next morning. I ate the small meal his wife gave me, though my body was sore and my pride was broken. I kept my eyes down, listening to their laughter, as if nothing had happened. On the outside, I was silent, but inside, something new was building. Not fear, not shame, but resolve. I knew then that the humiliation I carried would become the fire that guided me to my revenge. My son thought pushing me down the stairs proved his power. He thought laughing at my pain made him strong. He believed that age had stripped me of everything: respect, dignity, control. But what he forgot is that real power is not in muscles or in loud voices. Real power lives in silence, in signatures, in documents, in the quiet control of legacy. As I sat in my chair that night, bruised but awake, I remembered what he had forgotten. Every deed, every account, every property paper was still in my hands. He strutted through the house like a king, but the crown was never his. He thought the walls belonged to him because he lived in them. He thought the food was his because his wife served it. He thought the car was his because he drove it. But the truth was simple. Everything, down to the smallest detail, was still mine. My name sat on the house deed. My signature controlled the bank accounts. My hand had written the will that decided the future. I was the architect of the life he enjoyed, and with one stroke of a pen, I could erase him from it. It almost made me laugh, not with joy, but with bitter irony. The man who mocked me, who called me weak, who laughed as I lay bruised at the bottom of the stairs, was living inside a world I built. His arrogance was built on foundations I had laid brick by brick. And if I chose, I could pull those foundations out from under him, leaving him with nothing but the dust of his pride. As he slept that night, I thought of all the sacrifices he had erased from his memory. He did not remember the years I worked from sunrise to sunset to buy that very house. He did not remember the times I went hungry so he could have food. He did not remember the debts I cleared when his gambling nearly destroyed him. He did not remember the car I bought for him, the one he later drove with arrogance, pretending he earned it. He thought he was the master now, but he was standing on ground held together by my hands. He had forgotten that old age does not mean weakness. It can mean wisdom. It can mean patience. And patience is dangerous in the hands of someone who holds the keys to your future. He thought I was powerless, but power does not always shout. Sometimes it waits, quiet and steady, until the right moment comes. As I pressed my hand against my bruised chest, I whispered to myself, "He has forgotten who I am. Not just a frail old man, not just his father. I was still the master of this house, the holder of the deeds, the keeper of the will. And if he believed that cruelty had stripped me of value, then he would learn the hardest lesson of his life, that everything he mocked me for could be taken away in silence." The thought gave me strength. My pain no longer felt like only suffering. It felt like fuel. Each bruise reminded me of what he thought he had done to me, and each bruise reminded me of what I could do to him. His laughter had pierced my dignity, but I still held the weapon he had forgotten: the law, the papers, the inheritance. He lived on borrowed ground, borrowed wealth, borrowed respect. And I was the lender. That night, as I watched him walk proudly through the house, speaking loudly, demanding things from his wife, I did not see a strong man. I saw a child still living in the shadow of his father's work. I saw someone who thought strength came from pushing and shouting. But true strength comes from control. And I still had control. He thought I was finished, but in truth, I was just beginning. That night, after the house went silent and their laughter was gone, I sat alone in the dark with my pain. My ribs ached, my knees burned, and every breath felt heavy. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the choice rising inside me, steady and sharp. I had been silent for too long. I had endured too much. I had allowed my patience to become his weapon. But the fall down the stairs changed everything. That push was not only a push of the body, it was a push of the soul. It shoved me out of love and into clarity. I realized then that my son would never change. Cruelty was not a phase. It was not anger from stress. It was not temporary arrogance. It was who he had become. I saw it in his eyes. I heard it in his laugh. I felt it in his hands when he pushed me down. He enjoyed my pain. He fed on my weakness. He found joy in my humiliation. That kind of cruelty does not heal. It grows like a weed, spreading until it strangles everything around it. If I stayed silent, it would strangle me too. So I made a decision. No more waiting, no more hoping, no more forgiving. My son had to face consequences. Not through shouting, not through fighting, but through something deeper, something permanent. Words could be ignored. Pleas could be mocked. But actions, legal, binding, final actions, could not be undone. I would take from him the one thing he thought was his forever. His future. I sat there, thinking of the papers locked away in my drawer, the deeds to the house, the accounts in the bank, the will that carried my name and my signature. All of it sat quietly under my control, and all of it could be changed. With one choice, I could strip him of everything. With one decision, I could erase the arrogance from his face. With one signature, I could leave him not as a master, but as a beggar. I thought of his sister, the daughter who still spoke to me with kindness, who still checked on me, who still called me father with respect. She had no arrogance in her heart, no cruelty in her voice. She had lived without complaint, even when I could not give her as much as I gave him. I remembered her helping me with small chores, guiding me gently when my hands shook, speaking softly when my voice cracked. She had shown me the care I dreamed of receiving in my old age, and I knew then where my legacy belonged. The decision hardened like stone inside me. I would cut him out completely. Not a penny, not a brick, not a single leaf from the land would go to him. Everything would pass to his sister. She would inherit not just the house, but the honor of the family name. He would inherit nothing but the memory of what he lost. For years, I thought my role as a father was to forgive, to carry, to endure. But in that moment, I understood that my role as a father was also to protect, even if it meant protecting myself from my own blood. The boy I raised had turned into my tormentor. The man I loved had turned into my enemy. And so I would treat him as such. I whispered to myself, "It ends tonight." Not the love, because love dies slowly. Not the pain, because the bruises would last. But the silence, the helplessness, the waiting. Those ended that night. In their place stood resolve, sharp and unshakable. I would not shout at him. I would not beg him. I would not tell him of my plan. I would simply act, quietly, legally, permanently. And when the day came, he would learn that the man he called weak still held the strongest weapon of all, control. That was the decision I made at the bottom of those stairs. To take away everything he thought was his, to give it all to his sister, and to watch as arrogance turned into begging. The next morning, I woke with my body aching, but my mind clear. Each bruise reminded me of his hands. Each step reminded me of the stairs. Each breath reminded me of the laughter. But I was no longer drowning in humiliation. I was swimming in resolve. I knew what I had to do, and I would not delay. I washed my face slowly, put on clean clothes, and walked out of the house without a word. My son thought I was weak, but that morning, every step I took carried strength he would never understand. I walked to my lawyer's office, the same man who had helped me with the will years ago. He was surprised to see me so early, bruises visible on my arms and face. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. I waved his concern away. "What happened doesn't matter," I said. "What will happen does." He saw the fire in my eyes and knew this was not a visit of weakness, but of purpose. I sat across his desk and told him my decision. Everything would go to my daughter. The house, the land, the accounts, the family name. My son's name was to be erased from every document, every paper, every line of inheritance. My lawyer leaned back, nodding slowly. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This is permanent. Once it's done, there's no going back." I did not hesitate. "I am sure," I said. He pushed me down the stairs and laughed. "I will not let him stand on the foundation I built. He will learn that cruelty has a price." The lawyer pulled out the papers, thick with weight and law. I placed my hand on the pen, my fingers trembling not from weakness, but from the power of the moment. One stroke, one signature. That was all it took. I signed slowly, my name flowing across the page like a final judgment. With each signature, my son's future dissolved. With each line, my daughter's future was secured. We rewrote the will completely. His name was removed, stripped away as if it never belonged. My daughter's name was written in its place, her inheritance sealed. I signed the deeds of the house and land, transferring everything to her name. My son had believed the house was his castle. He had mocked me on the stairs inside it. Now, without his knowledge, that castle was no longer his. When the papers were done, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. A strange calm washed over me. It was not joy, not celebration. It was justice. Quiet, cold, steady justice. My lawyer gathered the papers, stamping them, sealing them, locking them into the system where no hand could touch them. The future had been rewritten, and my son was erased. As I left the office, the sun was brighter, the air cleaner. My body still ached, but my heart felt lighter. For years, I had carried the weight of silence. That morning, I carried nothing but resolve. I walked past shops, past people, past the streets of the town, and no one knew that inside my bag lay papers powerful enough to destroy a man's pride. When I returned home, my son did not notice anything. He was too busy shouting into his phone, bragging about money, making plans, laughing with arrogance. He thought his future was safe. He thought the house he stood in was his. He thought the name he carried was untouchable. I walked past him silently, hiding my smile. He had no idea that his empire had already crumbled. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of the moment he would learn the truth. I thought of his face when he realized the house was no longer his, when he discovered the will had erased him, when he reached for money that no longer belonged to him. I thought of his rage, his panic, his fear. And then I thought of my daughter, her soft voice, her gentle care. For once, justice would fall on the right shoulders. The execution was not loud, it was not violent, it was quiet, legal, final. My son believed strength was in the push of his hands, in the sound of his laughter, but true strength was in my silence, in my pen, in my choice. And now, his future was gone. Weeks later, the storm I had set in motion finally broke. My son, still full of arrogance, lived as if the world belonged to him. He strutted through the house, demanding things from his wife, speaking about plans he could not afford, making promises he could never keep. He did not know the ground beneath him had already shifted. He did not know that every brick, every room, every dollar had slipped from his hands quietly, without a sound. The moment of betrayal came like the slow cracking of ice. At first, it was small things. He went to the bank to withdraw money for one of his schemes. Instead of being greeted with a smile and cash in hand, he was met with silence from the clerk and a screen showing zero balance in the accounts he thought were his. Confused, he argued, demanding to know why his money was gone. The clerk told him politely, "These accounts are no longer under your authority. They are under your father's, and he has transferred them." His face turned pale, his voice shaking with panic. He came home that day furious, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. He shouted my name, his voice filled with rage. "What have you done?" he demanded. I sat quietly in my chair, not answering, not moving. The silence was my weapon. The more I stayed calm, the louder he grew, until his wife stepped in to quiet him. But inside, I could see the fear spreading in his eyes. He knew something was wrong. He knew the ground was slipping. Days later, the truth grew heavier. He received letters from lawyers, official papers that explained what had happened. The house he thought was his inheritance was no longer his. The land he bragged about was gone. His name had been erased from the will. His sister, the one he had always mocked for being soft, now held everything. She was the owner of the house. She was the heir of the wealth. She was the keeper of the family name. And he was nothing. The betrayal hit him like a storm. He shouted, he cursed, he broke things in his anger. He accused me of being cruel, of being unfair, of betraying him. But betrayal is not when a father protects his dignity. Betrayal is when a son pushes his father down the stairs and laughs. Betrayal is when a son turns love into shame. He had betrayed me long before I ever signed those papers. My act was not betrayal. It was justice. I watched as he tried to argue with his sister, demanding she share what was now hers. She stood firm, papers in hand, showing the truth. Everything was legal. Everything was final. His words meant nothing. His rage meant nothing. The power he once thought he had vanished in front of him. I sat in the corner, watching the boy who once laughed at my pain, now drowning in his own. The neighbors began to whisper. The man who once boasted loudly about his future now walked the streets with lowered eyes. Relatives who once respected him now shook their heads in disgust. They looked at him and said, "He mocked his father and lost everything." The shame spread faster than fire. The proud son became the humiliated beggar. He tried calling me over and over. His voice filled the phone lines, desperate, pleading, angry. Sometimes he begged, sometimes he threatened, sometimes he cried. But I did not answer. Silence was my answer. Each ring that went unanswered was another reminder of his cruelty. Each ignored call was justice served in quiet. The betrayal cut him deeper than any wound. It was not just money he lost, it was his identity. For years, he believed he was the master of the house, the heir of the wealth, the pride of the family. Now, with one decision, all of that was gone. He was left standing outside the house, watching as his sister carried the keys. He was left sitting in debt, begging for what he once mocked. He was left with nothing but shame. And I, the father he thought was powerless, sat in silence, watching. The son who pushed me down the stairs had fallen further than I ever did. My fall was down wooden steps. His fall was down the staircase of pride, dignity, and legacy. And there would be no hand to catch him. The fallout did not come all at once. It came piece by piece, like a roof collapsing slowly until nothing is left but dust. At first, my son walked with anger, trying to convince everyone it was a mistake. He told neighbors that the papers were fake. He told relatives that I had been tricked. He told his wife that it was only temporary, that soon he would fix everything. But truth cannot be hidden forever. The signatures were mine. The seals were real. The law was final. And with each day, denial turned into fear. His wife was the first to turn cold. She had married him for the promise of wealth, for the house, for the name. Now that promise was gone. I could hear their arguments from down the hall. Her voice sharp, asking, "What did you do? How could you lose everything?" His replies were broken, angry, filled with excuses. But excuses do not pay bills. Excuses do not buy respect. She began to look at him not as a husband, but as a failure. And failure is a poison that spreads quickly in a marriage built on greed. Neighbors who once envied him now mocked him. They whispered when he passed, "That's the one who pushed his father down the stairs. That's the one who lost everything." Their words cut into him the way his laughter once cut into me. I watched from my chair as he walked past them with his head lowered, shoulders hunched. The proud son was gone. What remained was a broken man. Relatives stopped answering his calls. The same people who once admired his confidence now saw him as a disgrace. They sided with his sister, praising her for standing by me, for showing care, for receiving what was rightfully hers. He was left alone, abandoned by the very family he had once tried to impress. His phone, once filled with contacts and plans, now filled with silence. The debts he had hidden began to rise. Letters arrived at the house, demanding payment. Collectors called day and night. Without access to the accounts, he had nothing to give. His arrogance crumbled into desperation. I saw him pacing the yard, phone in hand, pleading with people for loans, begging for favors, making promises he could never keep. Each time, the answer was the same. No. The final blow came when he tried to confront me. He stood in front of me, his eyes filled with anger and fear. "Father," he said, his voice shaking, "you can't do this to me. I'm your son. I deserve the house, the land, the inheritance. It's mine by blood." I looked at him quietly, my hands folded in my lap. For years I had stayed silent out of patience, out of hope. This time, my silence was not weakness. It was power. I did not answer him. I let him hear the emptiness of his own words. Blood does not buy respect. Blood does not erase cruelty. Blood is nothing when the heart behind it is rotten. He tried again, raising his voice. "You owe me," he shouted. My daughter stepped into the room then, holding the legal papers. She placed them on the table between us, her hand steady, her face calm. "It's mine now," she said firmly. "The house, the land, everything. It belongs to me." My son stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. For the first time, he was speechless. For the first time, his arrogance had no ground to stand on. The fallout spread further. Friends stopped visiting him. His wife began spending nights away, her patience gone. He grew thinner, his face lined with stress. The man who once laughed as I fell now looked like he was falling every day, deeper into despair. And still, my phone rang. Call after call, his number lit the screen. Sometimes 42 times in a single night. Each missed call was his desperation screaming into the void. Each unanswered ring was justice ringing back. I never picked up, not once. Because there are some things that cannot be forgiven, some wounds that cannot be healed. He pushed me down the stairs and laughed. And now, life had pushed him further, and no one would catch him. In the end, justice did not come with noise. It came with silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of power. I no longer shouted. I no longer begged. I no longer explained myself to the son who had betrayed me. I simply lived while he was left to crumble. That was justice. I spent my days in peace, sitting in the home that now belonged to his sister. She treated me with respect. She cooked meals with care. She asked about my health, listened to my stories, and never once made me feel like a burden. When she passed me food at the table, her eyes held love, not mockery. It was in her presence that I found comfort again. The daughter who was once overlooked became the heir, not just of my wealth, but of my heart. My son, meanwhile, stood outside the gates of the same house he once thought was his. He begged, not with pride, but with desperation. He begged for money. He begged for a chance. He begged for forgiveness. But every plea fell into silence. Neighbors saw him standing there, his once proud head lowered, his voice broken. They whispered about the boy who mocked his father and lost everything. His shame was not hidden. It was public. And each whisper cut into him deeper than my words ever could. The justice was not only in the wealth I gave to his sister. It was in the way he had to watch her live the life he thought was his. It was in the way she carried the keys, the papers, the power, while he carried only regret. He could not run from it. He could not escape it. Every time he looked at her, he saw the cost of his cruelty. Every time he heard her laugh with me, he remembered his own laughter the night he pushed me down the stairs. But the laughter was no longer his. It was mine. There were times he tried to reach me through others. He asked relatives to speak on his behalf. He asked neighbors to convince me to forgive him. But they all refused. They had seen his cruelty. They had seen his downfall. None of them pitied him. Instead, they praised me for standing firm, for protecting my dignity. They told me, "You did the right thing." And in their words, I felt a quiet kind of pride. I did not need revenge in fire or fury. My revenge was in patience, in control, in silence. The pen in my hand had been stronger than his shove. The papers I signed had been louder than his laugh. The legacy I gave to his sister had been sharper than any insult he ever spoke. He thought pushing me down the stairs would prove my weakness. Instead, it proved my strength. Because I stood up, and I cut him out completely. Now I live in peace. I sit in the garden in the mornings, the sun warming my face. I eat meals without fear of insult. I sleep without the sound of cruel laughter haunting me. My daughter stands beside me, proud to carry the family name. And my son, the one who thought he would inherit everything, stands with nothing. His arrogance is gone, his pride is gone, his future is gone. That is justice. Final thought. He pushed me down the stairs and laughed. I gave everything to his sister and left him to beg.